Welcome, Stacy. It's so fun to have you on my show today.
Thanks, Heather. It's good to see you.
You too. I don't think we get to see each other enough or talk enough, do we?
No, we don't.
Well, for you listeners, you're in for a special treat. You know, I'm doing a series now on children and anxiety. It's my heart and my passion as a leadership coach to support the whole person in my work with leaders. And since all of us are human beings and we all have the same challenges and struggles, one of the things I've noticed when our children are struggling, we are struggling at work. So I deeply care about that. And that's why I want to do a series on that. Many of my clients are grappling with their children, anxiety in their children, and it's really on the uptake. And as an educator, you know, with my last podcast, I got to speak to a little bit about this. So when Natalie, my podcast producer, said, who can we bring on as an expert? I immediately thought of you, Stacy.
Thanks.
So let me introduce you to our listeners here. Stacy's a mother of 4 and a therapist. She's on a mission, and I love this because I'm reading on the back of her book, but she's on a mission to restore wonder to childhood, connection to families, and intimacy to relationships. So when I read that, it just made me smile. She wrote this book, 30-Day Blackout. And for those of you who are watching this, I'm holding it up. Just an awesome book. I've just so thoroughly enjoyed it. Offers so much practical advice and hope. So I think I just want to pass it over to you, Stacy. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just jump in.
Yeah, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a registered play therapist supervisor, which basically means I have specialized training and working with young children in the play years. Born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm the owner of Music City Family Therapy, which is a unique counseling practice here in town where we specialize in working with the whole family on a child's behalf. So the majority of the calls we get are parents concerned about their young children. Certainly we work with adolescents as well, but we really specialize in working with kids in the play years.
I love that. And I can't help but notice in your background, I see some art behind you. It's beautiful. Yes. And look at mine. For those of us who are watching, I have my own art. I also do my own art as an artist.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what art does for the brain, whether it's child or adult.
So art is play. You know, what we know about the brain is in the right hemisphere of our brains is where our creativity and our emotions are kind of centered. The left side of our brain is more of our thinking brain. And whenever I am working with a child, I really try to focus on using that part of the brain that doesn't need words. It's the part of the brain that expresses without needing to use language, which is so wonderful for kids 3 to 12 especially. And so I really see art as part of a play process, not only for children, but quite honestly for adults as well. Whenever I'm working with an adult client, when I'm using that right hemisphere of the brain, it really helps them to access that artist part of them that they may have lost a long time ago. And, you know, even using their non-dominant hand in session and being able to create something, not for a product, but for the expression of it, for the process of it, really helps them to connect more to themselves. And I can certainly say for myself, whenever I take the time to paint, to draw, to create music, those are the times that I feel most connected to myself. And I really find that the same thing happens with, you know, adult children as well as minor children that are in the developmental phase of, you know, preschool, kindergarten.
Yeah.
This is the school years, you know, pre-adolescence. That's kind of the magical time of life that I truly enjoy intervening on their behalf, knowing that working with me or someone on my team for 3 to 6 months could very well change the trajectory of their life. And so it's very rewarding to me to work with kids in a preventative way. The parents don't necessarily see it that way when they're working with me, because they're typically in a crisis. But when you look at their lifespan as a therapist, as a child therapist, that you're changing the trajectory of their life in just a very short amount of time. We're working with an adult, it just takes longer. So maybe it's my short attention span, but but I love working with kids and creativity and expression with art, play, music, clay, Play-Doh, anything that kind of uses that right hemisphere. So
yep. I remember as an educator, I started researching quite a bit the right side of the brain, because I was dealing with a lot of the heightened anxiety in the East LA, and I talked about it in my last podcast. But one of the phrases that I never forgot, it was like seared in my brain, is that you cannot emotionally heal without engaging the right side of your brain. And I thought that was so powerful. And it also was poignant for me when I started counseling in my 20s. I was very verbal. I had mastered the English language as an adult. And I remember my therapist said, "You could talk circles around me. I'm going to leave the room, and here's a pad, and I want you to draw what you're feeling."
Absolutely.
And it was so powerful.
A good therapist you found.
Yeah. Wasn't she amazing?
Yeah.
And then she's the one that moved me into art. So now all the paintings I do is really over the last several decades that came out of that awareness that there's things that we're coping with that we have no words for, but pictures. And as we let ourselves explore it, and to your point, play, it also is honoring the story that we're trying to tell, or maybe that our child was trying to tell that didn't have words, or even that we didn't get to develop around the emotional language. And we had, again, maybe in my case, I had a tremendous amount of pressure to develop it around the logic or the left hemisphere. The right was seen as irrelevant or unproductive or unsuccessful or unachieving. So to learn how to engage that and keep them integrated was really a part of my adult journey. And it was also what allowed me to navigate the anxiety and the depression that I was dealing with from my younger 20s. I want to pivot over to your book. I just loved it, Stacy. Just well done. Well done.
Thank you.
And I noticed it got a foreword by Dr. Sears. For those of you who don't know Dr. Sears, tell us a little bit about Dr. Sears. He's a prominent voice in the field for children.
So I met Dr. Sears through Attachment Parenting International. I have a program here in Nashville called Music with Mommy, which is a mom-child bonding program specifically for mothers who don't have family nearby and really have a strong need for connection. And as you know, being a mother of a baby, it can be one of the most isolating times of your life if you're not surrounded with family. So I met him through Attachment Parenting International with some mutual friends. And when he found out about my work doing digital detoxes, he and his wife, Martha, were immediately extremely supportive of what I've been trying to do for the last 10 years with really what's really a very simple intervention that I call the 30-day Blackout, which is the name of the book that I wrote, that he wrote the foreword to. So about 11-ish years ago, I was having multiple families with multiple children who wanted me to work with their whole family. And in the field of therapy, you really pick one client to work with typically. So when the family was asking me, would you be willing to work with our whole family? I was a little thrown in the beginning because nobody taught me how to work with the whole family when several children were the primary, clients, if you will. And so I created a treatment plan that I call the Mountain Method, and it's specifically derived from this one intervention called the 30-day Blackout. So I'll just tell you a story. It's in the book, but it's a story of a family with 5 children, all 5 of them. Their behavior was they were all very dysregulated. They had been on screens for many years. And I'll just admit that the first time that I implemented the 30-day blackout, I had no idea what I was doing. But because I had an opportunity to live in a cabin with no electricity with my husband in my early 20s, I'm now just turned 48. I think I was 22, 23. I can't remember now. We had an opportunity to live in an 1850s cabin with no electricity, no running water. And, we had the outhouse and the whole thing. The story went, we had a very dear friend. He was married to an airline pilot, and they had an airstrip way out in the country. They moved out there, and he would fly small private planes for various folks, but then he would go to Nashville to fly the big fat planes, and there was a tiny little cabin on their property that I found to be so charming. And I asked them, I talked to his wife and said, it would be so fun for my husband and I to come out here and experience this for a few days. So we did, my husband and I did. And while I was laying in the bed in this non-electric cabin, I turned to my husband and just said, I want to live here. And he looked at me like I had lost my mind, because I didn't go anywhere without my curling iron and my hair dryer and my makeup and all the things. And he just thought I was having a moment, but I really wasn't. There was something stirring in me that was longing for an experience of simplicity, of the natural world, mainly because I was raised in alcoholism and was evicted. I can't land on a number, but I think it was about 15 times that I was evicted with my family from our homes from birth until I left home at 16. And being raised in that kind of chaos created a very dysregulated nervous system in me. Now, I didn't have the language for this when I was 22, 23. But I knew something inside of me was longing to regulate, although I didn't have language for it like that then. And what ended up happening is Beth, who was the wife of this pilot, called me and said, actually, my husband called her, and she answered the phone. And she said, Ron Jagger, I was walking the land thinking about you, walking out of the cabin thinking about you and Stacy. And I wonder if you and Stacy would like to come out to the cabin and live for a little while, just have a sabbatical. So I really honestly feel like that was a synchronistic moment where, God, the universe, source, mystery of life, whatever you want to call that, was giving me an opportunity to have an adventure of connecting with myself, because I really didn't have an opportunity to connect with myself as a child very much. And so we were going to live out there for 3 months. We fell in love with gardening and living simply. I was actually a ballroom dance teacher at the time, believe it or not, and didn't tell any of my students what I was doing, because I thought that they would like, there was no GoFundMe back then, but I was thinking, if I tell my students this, they're going to like have a fundraiser and think that I'm homeless, but I truly wasn't. But so we moved out, we put all of our electronics away. We moved to this cabin. Mm-hmm. I remember sitting on the front porch of the cabin, and my husband went off to work, and it was 9:00 in the morning. And I thought, I'm just going to sit here and just be for a minute. And I noticed the wind, the trees were moving, the grass was kind of slowly moving. I was looking up at the sky, and really just being quiet. And what felt like several hours was 15 whole minutes, because I looked down at my watch and I was like, so it's 9:15, and what in the world am I going to do with myself in this tiny little cabin? So 3 months turned into 6 months, which turned into 18 months total. And I talk about the story a little more in the book, but I truly would not take $1 million for that time that I spent out there, because although, my practice has become very successful, I now have 4 children and a very full life. Down in my soul, I know that I can survive with very little, and that the meaning of life doesn't have a lot to do with all of our stuff, you know.
Well said.
So it was a really valuable lesson. So you fast forward, I'm now in private practice working with many families, and I intuitively knew what these kids needed. They needed a cabin experience. They needed an experience of unplugging from all the various video games and television shows that they were watching that was more than likely dysregulating their nervous system. So quite honestly, the intervention of the 30-day blackout digital detoxes was a very organic piece of my own story that was coming out. And it's an integral way of how I practice now. I mean, there's many families locally here in Nashville that know that. I mean, I'm really known for the lady that makes everybody turn their screens off for a little while, and I laugh and say, we're going to go Amish for just a little bit. You're going to live. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill your kids. So yeah, and Dr. Sears, I think, noticed that I had an ability to inspire families to unplug. And so there's a little bit of a sales element to it, like really finding out what parents really want for their children and what they're willing to do to get what they want. So it's a pretty big way of creating a scenario in a family where you're taking away all the distractions to really focus on the issues at hand. And I've really never seen it not work, to be honest.
Well, what I love about you, Stacy, is that it's so authentic. It's so similar to how I started my practice. I'm going to do it myself first. If it works, then I'll hand it out to other people. It with you. Yeah. But if it doesn't work, don't worry. I'll be the guinea pig. So everything I share, it's because it's something that I too had to learn to either kind of pull myself up or pull myself out, or to get unstuck in places in life when deep down you kind of know you're made for more, or this isn't all there is to life. So I want to read a passage from your book that I really loved. And then I want to ask you how this is syncing up with clients that are trying it. So let me start with you. When you talk about what you did from that cabin, this is the paragraph that I read that I just loved. You said, "What I didn't know then, but I know now, is that I was allowing my nervous system to regulate for the first time in my life."
In my life.
I was imprinting a new pattern of mindfulness into my lifestyle that would allow my brain to notice what I was seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, 5 senses, in the present moment. I was fully grounded for the first time ever. I love that. Speak more to that, and then tell me how that's translating over to your clients. Are you seeing the same thing?
Well, I can tell you that what you just read is the remedy to anxiety, because, when you learn about the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branch, and how when you're able to stay in your window of tolerance, that's when you're able to really be connected to yourself, to God, to nature, to the people around you. When you really start to understand that, you have sort of a template of what you personally need to do in order to be a human being instead of a human doing. And so many of the kids that come to see me, and I can just give a couple of examples. Earlier today, I had a 10-year-old boy whose mother wanted to bond with him. And so she had this great idea that they could bond by watching horror movies together.
Oh, gosh.
So this is really a perfect example of an educated parent who just doesn't understand doesn't understand what, when a nervous system is shocked, what happens with kids is they want to see it again because they want to understand. Their nervous system wants to understand. They wants to process it, to digest it, right? So there's a shock to the nervous system. And instead of digesting it through talking about it, through expression, through crying, through having some emotional literacy about, wow, I don't think I ever want to see a horror movie again. Like I'm mortified over this. What he would want to do is watch another horror movie, right? Or watch the same horror movie again because his nervous system was so shocked. He was wanting to digest it, but he just went and watched it again, right? Which is the same thing when kids are exposed to pornography, right? It's a premature, obviously, experience where their nervous system is shocked. They don't really know what to do with it. They don't know how to digest it. And so they watch it again, right? And that's kind of becomes the cycle of addiction for kids. And one of the primary reasons why I really continue to talk about this subject, because media trauma is a real thing. Kids, there's so many things that they can't digest. A lot of kids just can't digest the news. And so very simple things like telling parents, would you be willing to consider turning off the news in your home can make a huge difference in a child's anxiety level. And so
I can't digest the news, Stacy.
What now?
I can't digest the news.
No, most people can't anymore, but you would be surprised of how many parents I continue to educate on the nervous system and how the cycle of addiction begins and how media for kids, every time they get a like on whatever, Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook, it's difficult enough for adults to manage the adrenaline and the cortisol and all of that. But for a young child, it really can be a gateway to other things. And so just to turn your screens off for a month and allow the nervous system to regulate gives a child or a family the opportunity to experience mindfulness, just like I did at that cabin.
Maybe even experience regulation for the first time.
Maybe so. Because the truth is, even strollers are being created now with little clip-in iPads so that a baby doesn't have to look at the eyes of the mother, that the baby can look at an iPad and scroll an iPad. And I've had kids as young as 5 and 6 that when we do the blackout, they will scroll a blank, dead phone because they're so used to that scrolling. They have created a soothing, self-soothing pattern over just the scrolling, so they'll scroll a nothing phone. Totally
blank, no electricity, nothing even stimulating them.
There's nothing there, and they'll sit and scroll it.
Stacy, oh my gosh.
And the thing about it is, Heather, is, this is all very unintentional damage that we're doing to children. One of the pieces in the book, and I don't have a book with me, I don't know exactly, I think it said, Dr. Sears said, this is the biggest experiment on the developing brains of children in the history of mankind, because we have no research to date about, we just don't know enough about what this is doing to the developing mind of a young child, and honestly, it reminds me of cigarette smoking in the 70s and the 80s, like the movement of pulling out a cigarette, became very soothing. My father was a smoker, and I can remember whenever he was in any kind of distress, he would pull out a Cool Light 100 and smoke that thing. It was very calming for him, and it reminds me of the same kind of, let me grab my phone and get a little hit. Let me grab my phone and get a hit. And on some level, I really feel like we're living in an addicted culture now. And So we can all benefit from education around what is your window of tolerance? How are you expressing or experiencing a sympathetic rev up in your nervous system, or a dorsal parasympathetic collapse response in your nervous system, and just education around all of that.
Yeah.
And how that fits into anxiety, because
Yeah.
everybody's anxious now, well, I wonder why.
Yeah.
We're not spending enough time outside. We're not spending enough time with eye-to-eye contact with our loved ones. Just really basic things that we're missing out on, like hugging, just really simple stuff.
Yeah. Simple stuff, normal stuff, natural stuff, humane stuff. Right. And then we wonder why our children are losing some of their humaneness. I was looking back at Dr. Sears Ford, and here's the passage I think you're referring to. He says, the overuse of screen time reminds me very much of how we pediatricians have struggled to convince parents that junk food creates junk behavior and junk learning. Now is the time for parents, teachers, and all persons who have the best interests of children in mind to take action on the smart use of screen time, or as we pediatricians call it, the largest experiment on childhood brain development in the history of mankind. So it sounds like you're giving some remedy and even some gentle, kind guidance to your point too. I just love the fact that we're not shaming parents or even anyone working with children. We're in such a screen technology era, and we're using it in our educational systems. How do we support the different methods and strategies on the other side of the conversation? Yes, Google's been wonderful. Research has been wonderful. And the easy access to articles and new learning has been wonderful. How do we then support the other side of the coin as educators and parents are trying to figure out how to use technology for them and against them? What do you say to that when you look at the era that we are living in?
Well, the truth is, Heather, none of us have figured this out. But I can give you some guidelines of things that have worked in my practice. First of all, if you can wait until your child is in 8th grade to give them a smartphone, and what I recommend from anywhere from 8 to 9 to 10, when your child needs a phone, you want, the GPS is helpful. You need to be able to contact them. Like, we don't have rotary phones in our houses anymore, obviously. Is the Gab wireless phone. It is I call it a smarter phone for kids because it's internet free. It looks exactly like an iPhone, but it's an internet free phone where you can call, you can text, there's a radio, there's an alarm clock, and you have optionally, you can add the GPS where you know where your kiddo is. If you can use a Gab wireless phone until they're in 8th grade, where you can educate them and they're old enough to understand the nervous system, they're old enough to understand the importance of unstructured nature-based play and the importance of eye-to-eye contact and connection and family meals. And it's just so easy for a young child to kind of get swept away by an iPhone without, it's just, they're not doing it on purpose. It's so distracting that, is it ADHD or is it the phone? I hate to be so blunt, but we're throwing around ADHD diagnoses like it's like I don't know, well, it must be the ADHD. Well, or maybe we can look at some other angles first before we label a child with attention issues, or anxiety or whatever else. All that to say, it really is an art. I'll tell you, with my own family, we don't do things perfectly, but when you walk into our home, there's no screen. There's no screen in the living room. There's no screen in the dining room. There's no screen in the kitchen. We go upstairs to the bonus room, and that's where we have our TV, where we sit down and pop popcorn and have a family movie. But there's no screens in the bedrooms. There's no screens on the back porch. There's no screen in our cars, And please don't hear me as that being judgmental, because that's not my heart at all. Because when you read the book, you'll find out that I was literally a walking TV guide as a child. I could tell you, I watched every soap opera, game show. I watch Wheel of Fortune twice a day, like I've done my screens.
Yeah.
And I just, I think I wore myself out with all that wasted time. I mean, I think about 12 years you get to be a kid. That's it. 9 of them do you have conscious memory of. When you turn 13, you're practicing to become an adult. You're not a child anymore. So childhood is such a short-lived trip, that I wish that I could have some of that time back, that I was sitting in front of a television as a child, doing more creative endeavors, being outside. I mean, I loved being by the creek when I was a kid. And, when I take kids' screens away, or when I inspire parents to take the screens away, in the beginning, kids really do hate me. I mean, they literally hate my guts. When it's over, they're hugging me, thanking me, because they got what they really wanted. They got the connection, the play, the camping trips, the Uno card games at night. And so I'm really used to being hated in the beginning and loved when it's over with. So
They stick with it, Stacy?
What now?
What do they stick with it? Talk to me a little bit about sustainability. What's that look like after the 30 days?
So what I have found is that even families that fail miserably, they go from 8 hours a day of screen time to maybe 2.
That's huge.
Which is a huge difference,
Yeah.
And I tell them in the beginning, like, the truth is none of us can go completely blackout. None of us can totally black out, because school and work doesn't count for the blackout time. But post blackout, what ends up happening is I do it for 30 days with the family. When they see how much progress their family goes through in that 30 days, probably half of them will choose to do it again on their own without any prompting from me at all. The second month is a little more loosey-goosey. And I really recommend the second month to focus on, for young children, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is on Amazon Prime. Everything he ever did is on Amazon Prime. Slow screen time is really helpful the second month, like Little House on the Prairie, different strokes, like old school, slower screen time documentaries that are slow. But post blackout, what I recommend is 10 and under, the screen time marble system. That's where you give your young children 7 marbles in a jar. They get to spend their screen time as they want to. So each marble equals 30 minutes a day of screen time. So they get to spend their screen time all at once, or a little bit each day. They get to decide. And then as a parent, you have your own stash of marbles, and it becomes a token economy for good behavior. So if you have a child that cleaned up their room and helped you with dinner and, is being obedient, you can say, hey, I'm going to add another marble to your jar. And then if you have a child that is, not obeying and not, getting with the program, you have the option of taking a marble out of their jar. So I have found that to be very helpful for kids 10 and under. 11 and up, I really recommend the Gab wireless phone until at least 8th grade. Where you can monitor their screen time through a router that's called the Griffin router, GRYPHON. And that is extremely helpful for taking away any pornography, violence. If you don't want the news in your home, anything that you wouldn't want your kid to be exposed to if you're not home and they turn on the TV, it's not going to come through the Griffin router. So there's a lot of education around how do you keep your home, your screens clean, like having clean screen time is helpful. Every family is different in regards to what they're willing to do, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And I really just massage it and figure out a way for this family to figure out how screens can be the dessert of their life rather than the main course all day long. Because there's no child that ever says, I just can't wait to go back to my favorite day of TV. I mean, They don't say that. They say,
Right.
I wish I could go back to that weekend that I went camping with my dad. I wish I could go back to one more day of cooking,
Mm-hmm.
making an apple pie with grandma. I wish I could go back to sitting by the creek with my sibling. They don't say, golly, I just wish they could have given me one more day of sitting in front of a screen. It just never
Well,
happened.
what I'm also hearing too, Stacy, just as parents, it's like we don't remove the screen and not replace something more meaningful with it. And I'm thinking more of our teenagers who are connected to their screens a lot for social reasons. But it reminds me of how we feed our children. We don't give them chocolate chip cookies all day long. We focus the entree, to use your language for it, on good healthy foods, and then a chocolate chip cookie for dessert. But I'm curious because what I'm seeing, and I worked with the teenagers, I've got a 17-year-old, 19-year-old, and beautiful human beings, and have done really good job managing. We're at the place now where they're managing their screen beautifully and they're doing great. We had some of these structures and guidelines in place, but I'm seeing these other well-intentioned parents who didn't know how to put the structure in place, and then is realizing they basically have been given them a diet of chocolate chip cookies and they didn't realize it. And so they're feeling this regret. They're starting to see the link between high anxiety and their 15-year-old or 17-year-old. Can you speak a little bit to that? I don't want them to feel hopeless, but I want them to feel like, what do we do now to support a pivoting away from an over dependence on screen that maybe they've been having and almost created addiction for years?
There's something beautiful about sitting down with your children and saying, I'm sorry, I was
Mm.
wrong. I'd like to make this right.
Oh, I love that.
And the modeling of parents trickling down to their children is really
Mhm.
quite beautiful. I have found that when parents really when they reel themselves in and say, I'm going to commit to having boundaries around my own
Mhm.
phone, around my own screen time, it trickles down to even older children becoming willing to say, you know what, this screen right here is not really meeting my needs.
Mm.
It really isn't. And
Mhm.
what's so interesting with teenagers is when I explain to them the nervous system and
Mhm.
how when you're outside of your window of tolerance, it creates anxiety and the chemical, it's a drug our body makes when we get these phones and get all the light. I mean, the drug is in our own body. And
Mhm.
so when I explain that to a teen, they want to feel better, not realizing that their screen time and the social media is feeding into their anxiety and feeding into their depression. And they don't have enough time to be outside going for a
Mhm.
hike or a walk or meeting somebody for coffee in person.
Mhm.
So I'm amazed
Okay.
at how many teenagers are willing to do this
Mm.
themselves without any parental guidance at all because
Yeah.
they want to feel better and they don't really
Yeah.
understand. Like nobody's told them this. They haven't said
Yeah.
you have an overactive sympathetic nervous system, and the reason why you're
Yeah.
not able to sleep at night is because you're on your phone until the thing dies.
Right.
And this is what's happening in your
Yeah.
actual brain. And
Well,
they're
it
and
makes,
they're like, thank you. Nobody's ever
yeah.
told me this before. And they're willing to put boundaries around it themselves and tell their friend. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had clients that have said, you need a t-shirt that says we survived the 30-day blackout because it's not that bad. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really honestly, and to your point,
Yeah.
when you take away the screens and you replace it with connection-based activities,
Uh-huh.
when you replace it with nature-based experiences,
Yeah.
kids don't miss it. In
Yeah.
fact, they prefer it. And then you can kind of create a scenario where your screens, your phone. I mean, listen, I love this thing. You want to know why? Because I can run my business from anywhere.
Me
It's
too. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
But even myself, I mean, I leave my screens in my butler's pantry or in my car so that there's a healthy
Mhm.
distance, a proximity from me where I'm not giving my children the message that this phone is more important to me than you are.
Right.
And I find over and over again that parents are not doing this intentionally, but their children's perception is you would rather be on your phone than with me. And that kind of attachment rupture is I mean, I might be a little dramatic, but maybe not. It's trauma. I can't get to you. I can't connect with you because you'd rather be on your phone than with me. Is my relationship with you important?
Right. So we need to model it too as parents. And it reminds me of when my daughter's about 15. And, I didn't grow up with smartphones. You and I didn't grow up with smartphones. So
No.
this is the grand experiment, even in parenting. But I noticed her anxiety was going up. And I realized, even though we had monitored screen time and our motto is be where you're at, and you're not at your screen, you're right here at the family table. We're right here at in the living room, or we're right here on family vacation. So our screens were always, to your point, a assist, and whether it's education or quick communication, but it's not a time to get lost in this virtual world. So I think a lot of parents aren't realizing that our kids are getting lost in this virtual world. But I was watching my daughter and I realized she was trying to keep up with the window of time for response, which is seconds now. When you and I grew up, somebody called, they talked to one of our parents, we got a message to us, and maybe we talked to them that day if we were free, if we were available. Maybe we talked to them when we got back to school the next day. Maybe we didn't talk to them for a couple of weeks and we just kept playing phone tag. Remember?
It's true.
So I was watching her and I realized she's got all these different pockets of friends. And I just finally said, okay, sweetie, we get to educate your friends that you are not reachable 24/7. So as a parent, blame it on me. All phones are off at our home at a certain time. So just tell them, phones we're putting a basket downstairs. And so just say it's our parent rules. So you don't have to feel the pressure of that, but also just educating her as she moves into adulthood. Educate your friends. You are not available 24/7. Even all my friends, they'll know. Sometimes I do a quick text. Sometimes they might not hear from me, but I don't want to feel punished or make sure that there's no misunderstanding. I value being with you face to face. And sometimes I'll even shock people and just go, I'm tired of texting. I'll pick up the phone and talk to them. And then it's so funny because they don't pick up and I go, that's the culture we live in, right? We were just texting, but we don't have time to actually say the conversation. So I kind of joke around that, but I want to remind people that we get to take our power back, and we really get to take our social boundaries back and our relational power, so that we're not victimized. And when I gave her that permission to not be available 24/7 and put some boundaries down, she was looking for that, instead of feeling like my friends are getting offended or hurt because I'm not responding within seconds. We're not even talking minutes, right? It's just got to be within seconds. Like, where are you? Why haven't you responded? So I kind of had to coach her on saying, here's what you tell them. I don't like to respond that much on text, or I don't really want to have to feel the pressure to do Snapchat with you. I don't want to have to you educate them on what brings you peace for how you communicate, which again, we learned as adults, because remember the boundaries we had when we were younger. We're like, I'm not putting up with this, right? I'm not going to be sitting there getting pinged 24/7. And I jokingly joined Snapchat, but I only have two followers, and it's my daughter and my son. I just want to be able to Snapchat with them. And people keep trying to friend me. And I'm like, why? I'm so not a friend you want to have, because I will never respond to you. So it's kind of learning to keep these boundaries. And even like on social media, people will try to reach out and talk to me on social media. Occasionally I'll respond. Other times I don't. I'm like, I will not feel the pressure. You want to call me, you can call me, you can email me. Those are probably the most professional ways to reach me. But other than that, I actually have a whole team that runs the social media, so that I don't have to get involved in a virtual world when I love the world I'm in. That's the thing I think our parents and our adults and our educators can really support this new generation coming up. I think they're fuzzing these worlds and the boundaries around them. And they're not being given the permission to put some clean boundaries around them that says, this one isn't real. And it's really not fun to feel this pressure to be available 24/7. Who wants that? This one, the one is real, where you are literally going to bed and no one's going to bed with you. So don't take that to bed with you. No one is in your room with you. So don't feel the pressure to have that conversation. There is no slumber party going on. You're literally wanting to have some downtime. A lot of our parents aren't realizing that our kids need support on how to slow down, stop that central nervous system, and then put some boundaries around being reachable 24/7. It's so invasive, isn't it? You're getting victimized by your own phone.
My own family, we black out every August. We never look forward to it. My kids are always like, we have to do this again. But I'm always amazed, it takes about 5 days for us all to kind of get used to what's happening. And, around day 6, day 7, I find that every year we talk about things that we probably wouldn't have talked about otherwise. Because, we're all a little distracted during the year. And during that blackout month, we're talking about things that are important, that are needed, conversations. And it really models what I see with my clients, and that the first 5 days are kind of hell on earth for many of my clients, and I kind of prepare them for that. Day 6 and 7, I call the door of boredom, where kids think boredom is going to kill them, but it never does. Boredom doesn't kill children. It's actually required. Boredom is required for a child to kind of tap into their creativity. And so it's really not a bad thing. After they go through that door of boredom, the next 3 weeks after that, I really coach parents to replace connection-based activities for what used to be entertainment while I'm working with the family. And it's those sessions that are so beautiful and helping them to come up with ways to connect. I have communication maps that I teach them how to use, where they talk through, we have informational conversations, we have competitive conversations, and we have connecting ones. And most of the families that come to see me, they're not having a lot of connecting conversations. So to be able to teach them what that looks like, what that feels like, what that sounds like. And then, I'm able to give them a bunch of tools of how to go forward, of how to resolve conflict in their home, how to balance their lives, how to put media and screen time in its proper place, where it's not owning them anymore. You own your phone does not own you. It's really pretty rewarding, and it's just so simple. It's like eating your fruits and vegetables.
Do you have any of those resources?
It sounds so easy. It's not. If you do it, you're going to feel better. So anyway.
Do you have any of those resources around conversations on your website?
I do. My communication mats, they're called Magic Mats, communication tools for connecting. And you can find those on my website under resources.
Perfect. Those are helpful. We actually have a stack of conversation starter cards. And I like the themes, like some are about future, some are about present, some are about past. Again, my kids are older, so I'm trying to engage young adults, but we're tired. It's a long day. None of us have this really creative, stimulating conversation. So I always just coach parents on, it's okay. You don't have to carry the weight of it. Like, we'll literally pull out this box of cards ourselves. My husband and I both talk for a living. So sometimes we're drained, but we want to connect over family time or over dinner, or even everyone rendezvousing after a long day, and we'll sit on the couch. If we don't have the conversation starters we want, we'll pick up the box. Someone will grab a card. I'll grab a card. The kids will grab a card. So we're engaging them on even using tools to ask things about each other. The other thing I'm realizing too is the importance of venue. I love the fact that when you said there was no screens in your living room, we scooped the whole family up. We'll go sit out on the patio and light the fire. There's something so soothing about being able to look at something like a fire. Absolutely. Or outside, and as the sun is setting or the sun is rising or whatever it is, it allows everybody to slow down their central nervous system, gets them in nature. And it's amazing the conversation that starts flowing kind of from a different space, head space and heart space, isn't it? Like, we're not even used to getting there, but the environment kind of helps us get there.
Yeah, the natural world, it's, it's kind of speaks to you, and I tell parents a lot, sometimes you don't need words, just pick up some Uno cards and play Uno, and you don't even have to talk. And you study interpersonal neurobiology, and you realize when you have two nervous systems in the same room together, they're dancing and speaking to each other without language. And just your presence is enough. And Uno cards. I mean, sometimes that's all that you need is
I love that. I love
5 minutes and a pack of Uno cards. We've made this too complicated, too
Yep.
difficult. It's really not that difficult. It's
Yeah.
not easy, but it's pretty simple too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. It gives parents a lot of hope that they can trust their instinct, trust their gut, trust their timing, just trust even the love that they hold for their children. As we wrap up, this is a question I love to ask. One of the things I'm finding as I'm talking to people all over the world and they're moving from a life of survival to thrival, I'm noticing a common denominator of morning rituals, like how they start their morning. So I guess I want to ask you, Stacy, how do you start your morning that kind of grounds you for the day and it helps you address your central nervous system from a place of peace?
I love this question. So my daily routine is to get up and I have a cup of coffee with my husband for probably 15, 20 minutes. And then we walk our dogs together in our neighborhood. We have a pond there and walking trails and 2 dogs. And one of the practices that a therapist friend of ours encouraged us to experience is a silent walk. And that's when we choose to walk in the mornings in silence. And it was very awkward. And I admit that I failed miserably several times because I've got motor mouth with my husband. But it's become a discipline for us to be able to walk together and just be together without talking in a silent walk. And I can tell you that I used to think that I needed my farm to be okay.
Yeah.
Because we lived here on this farm for over 12 years and before we moved back to town. And I was nervous, like, am I going to be able to live in a neighborhood and be able to continue these practices? But I can tell you that no matter where you are, if you're in the city, the country, and I used to not be able to say this honestly, because I really depended on my land here on my farm to kind of ground me for a long time. And now in our new place where we live now, I can say that it doesn't matter if I live in the country, the city, the suburbs, wherever I am, that there are practices of mindfulness walking, silent walks, reading quality material. For me, it's either scripture or, I love Melody Beatty, her book, her letting go materials are
Codependency No More.
A regular thing for me.
Yep.
And a lot of like 12-step recovery kind of books that we, my husband and I have both been in recovery for a long time. But having those readings, having some time together to drink coffee, go for those walks is kind of how we start our day. And then when I'm in my car, I will listen to a podcast that's typically something around a groundedness exercise of some sort that I can listen to while I'm on my way to work. And then by the time I'm at work, I'm ready for my day.
Love it. I'm so glad I asked.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for just showing up and being so fully present and getting on the screen with me.
Yeah. I'm not anti-screen, I promise.
I love it.
That. I'm really not.
Oh, I love it. Any last encouragement before we sign off to our listeners?
Virginia Satir, who was the mother of family therapy, recommended that we hug our loved ones 4 times a day as just maintenance, that we hug our loved ones 8 times a day for growth and 12 times a day if you really want your loved ones to thrive. So I tell people all the time, hug them when they come in and hug them when they go out. Really get your hugs in, because I have found in families that we are not touching each other enough, and we need to hug it out. And just giving your kids and your loved ones, your family members, the message that we're all going to be okay, and reminding each other that, we're going to be okay is is special. It's important, and necessary.
I'm really glad I asked that last question because I wrote it down, Stacy, and I'm falling way short. I am scraping by with okay. I need to work on that as well. But I thought, am I even doing 4? Good grief, Heather, I got to step it up. But don't worry, I'm a total achiever. So now when I focus on that, I will be achieving.
You're going to have a hug spreadsheet the next time.
Totally. I'll calendar it.
There you go.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, listeners. It's been a pleasure listening to Stacy. I hope you got some really great things out of it that inspire you to bring into your own personal life, either for yourself or for your family or for your kids. We are both just cheering you on and wishing everybody just so much hope, so much peace, so much abundance, and so much freedom. Take care.